I think we have no time.
No time.
No time. That generation who were punished had to leave the profession to remove the stigma of reporting, because that pain was still there. People heard it in the corridors. Don't you dare. It took 25 years. It's as long as professionals stay in the profession to leave, and then for the new generation to take over. So do we have 20, 25 years from now, when stigma is still here, to report? And for these people who are flying, this basically, even if they don't collide, well, it's in their mind, it's playing, and it's taking away their working memory, it's taking away their situational awareness, it's taking away out of flying safe, it's taking away from doing their job diligently. It's playing on their mind. Are they crazy? Are they not? And it's a big issue, for a pilot to think, am I hallucinating? Am I safe? Am I a good pilot? Am I still fit to work? These things still go through the mind. Why should we put people through that? Like, you saw it, okay, well, let's look at it. What is it? What did you see? I think this is the first lesson. How does it detract from their professional life and from their attention of being safe? Why not accept and see what we can do with this? It's a real human concern. It's care. It's professional care.
Nuances Institute is a pioneer in the field of AI-driven comparative and qualitative analysis, and was established with the primary goal of uncovering the hidden value left behind in complex data sets. Through a combination of human expertise and cutting-edge technologies, Koyas has developed a range of services that cater to various industries. They are providing valuable insights that can help drive growth, formulate competitive strategy, and to identify key patterns in targeted demographics. Head to their site to learn more, koyas.institute. That's COEUS.institute.
Welcome to Merge. I'm Ryan Graves. Today, we're talking with Dr. Iya Whiteley, space psychologist and cognitive engineer. Iya is focused on improvements to human behavioral and cognitive function through information presentation on displays and design of training. She has 17 years of space human flight research and longer in aviation cockpit design, as well as designs for astronauts. She's advised the UK government as chair of the Space Environment Working Group and the member of the UK Space Exploration Advisory Committee. Thank you for joining me. And now, Dr. Iya Whiteley.
Well, yeah, thanks for joining me. I think one of the first things people might wonder is, what exactly is a space psychologist?
So I did not know that I would become a space psychologist, but I wanted to work either to become an astronaut or, as close as I could get to understanding how people work in extreme environment. And my interest is that how to improve people's performance when it's stressful, when it is, a lot of pressures. And I found that I have a background in martial art, and I really like that because I found that it keeps you focused. You're always watching, you're always aware. And I kind of grew up in that because my father was a martial artist and it was not allowed at the time. But I kind of grew up with awareness that you need to know that you're part of the environment, and everything has meaning. So it's Eastern philosophy, and it was important for me to see how, in extreme environment, some people excel and some people don't. So something happens, and the person taps into something that they did not know about themselves. Sure. And I find that a lot with very reactive professions, meaning like pilots, for example. It's a lot of training, so the reaction is trained, but nevertheless you have to make a decision and you have to go with it. You can't rewind.
You have to live with your decision.
Yeah, you can't rewind. It's not a simulator, right? You just stick to it and then work with the consequences. And what I found is that there are many professions and situations where people have these insights, of they wouldn't have thought of it if it wasn't for that situation, and they discover something about themselves. So I just started to look how I can learn more about that, about this human performance in extreme environments, and how do people tap into this? Why? All these myths that I grew up with, having, martial art temples where there were masters who could, sense the environment from, with their back, and, they knew what was coming, and that kind of understanding. And then I came, very close with that, coming with people, unexpectedly so. So, for example, there were firefighters in Australia, and so what they do is that they were studying the decision making in extreme environment, and the decision making, it's sort of hard to articulate of why one expert does something. And so they've used this methodology, which I think would be useful in the UAP, understanding what happens in our reactions to UAP.
So you, as a space psychologist, you've kind of been essentially working with people in highly technical tasks, highly specific tasks, such as pilots, such as astronauts. Can you explain some of the work that you've done in support of astronauts in your role as a space psychologist?
So I have several projects that I worked in space, and they're focused on improving our performance, but also to help us understand what happens to us as we sort of go into these unusual environments, or not suitable, I guess, for living for a long time. And I'm focused on research, on designing tools for psychological support, and measuring well-being, and seeing how to prevent problems, because it's the best cure, prevention. So what we found in the work, and there's always a team that we work together. And so what I found is that astronauts and cosmonauts are very capable, and the last thing they really want is to be monitored, right? So because they're there for a reason, they took a long time to get there, and there is this challenge of having, understanding your limit. And these are the people who always push the limit. They push the limit in their training. They study several subjects. They do many degrees. They multitask. They at the same time, they still have to maintain their personal life. And this is all quite challenging. So in order to assist, but not to, the point is to help. Mm-hmm. It's not to monitor for the sake of caught you.
NASA's are, basically the ground controller trying to set up a very controlled and disciplined and scheduled environment, and it's not allowing the astronauts to expand the way they normally do, kind of to fill the void, fill the time, be efficient with their time. Is that what you're describing?
Well, yes. So there's that. Mm-hmm. So, and that's interesting. I think what you're touching on, because there was a standoff, right, when the astronauts completely switched off the communication, which is unheard of. So on the Skylab, the crew being highly efficient, and the people are trying to use every minute because it's paid by the government, it's our tax, essentially, and people are fully aware of that, on the ground, who are helping, and people in space, so astronauts themselves. So they want to be as efficient as they can. So what happened is there was a frustration because they're given a schedule and it's planned meticulously so, because it sometimes has to coincide with a particular orbit, and you have to take shots, or you have to do certain measurements being in a particular location. And then you have to transmit it when you're on the other side of the Earth, and so on. So 90 minutes, it's a repeat. And of course they have to sleep, and they also want to engage in some conversation, personal conversation. But what happened is that they have sometimes they're not allowed to do a task and because it's not on the schedule.
Mm-hmm.
But they know they can do it because they've got their tools. Because sometimes the bigger problem actually on ISS, on International Space Station, is losing things. So to prepare to do a task, sometimes, one crew lost a shoe and never found it. It's like you think, how could you lose a shoe, and why do you need a shoe? Well, they need shoes to run, on the treadmill. But so they want to be efficient, but they were not allowed.
Mm.
So, and it's almost like, this absolutely top of the field expert who is very efficient to get there suddenly is not allowed to control their schedule,
So they just shut the comms off?
Yeah, they completely, they switched off for, I think it was 24 hours or long enough to make people nervous.
That's a long time.
It's a long time, yeah.
Do you have any idea of what the reaction was on the ground?
No, I haven't spoken with anyone on the ground, but the consequences is that they were making a point, but nobody was listening.
Mm-hmm.
They were saying, look, we could be doing these things, but we're not allowed. And so quiet boycott, I guess, is better than anything else in terms of sabotage.
And that's where you would come in before that, right? You would want to try to build that psychologically safe and comfortable place for astronauts or other explorers in the future to be able to operate in. That's how I interpret what a space psychologist or perhaps a cognitive engineer would do.
Mm-hmm.
These skill sets that you have studying that, my understanding is it applies to aviation safety. I've heard you speak to some of the nuances of aviation safety, and they resonated with me because it was some of the same language that was taught to me when I was in the Navy, flying F-18s, both on our initial training, but even every 6 months we go through recurrent training on different instrument and other types of training. And the words that you spoke to really resonated with me because one of the difficult things I find in this conversation is expressing why UAP represent an aviation safety concern. The common refrain is, well, why don't I hear about us hitting these all the time? As if that is, it's a binary issue. It's either they're not real or we must be hitting them all the time for them to be a safety issue. I understand that aviation safety is more nuanced. I lived and breathed that for a while. I was trained as an aviation safety officer. You were trained at a much higher level to interface at almost the first principles level, to my understanding, engineering level, to help understand what these procedures and these environments could be like, perhaps. So I really respect your training and your expertise in aviation safety, and I was hoping you'd help me help others understand a little bit about the nuance of aviation safety and aerospace safety. Let's talk a little bit about how aircrew work in a framework of safety and how we account for various assumptions or considerations as we go about our day. We don't just leave things unconsidered because we need to mitigate various safety issues to provide the high level of safety that we do, both on the military and the commercial side.
So I, on purpose, went through, pilot training. Well, because I just like flying, but also it's sort of like you're not unable to speak the language. And to me, to be able to speak the language is understanding the thought processes. So I cannot, for example, I'm not a surgeon. So when I worked with surgeons, I found it difficult to actually communicate because there's a lot of other terminology, know-how, and understanding. But when I understood, what the flying processes is about, so to understanding, like you have to have peripheral vision when you are landing, and nobody can kind of explain this to you until you felt it, and knowing where your wheels are and in relation to the runway, how fast you're going, how you should be accelerating, and when you're going to touch down, okay, before you do, So it's all that feeling, and you can't possibly explain that to me if I'm not a pilot, not really. And so understanding that thought process was important for me, of what you go through in your mind in order to actually help in any way. because it's something that is so embedded in how you think. So, and to understand that you always have to be ahead of the plane all the time, it's a big deal, and not many people understand. So, like in the car, right? People are driving, and you would look, I don't know, pick music, or you got distracted a little bit, but you're not planning, because you're gonna, I don't know, have to land in a couple of minutes, and you have to watch where you might have to, turn, what the winds are. You have to keep all of that in mind. So to understand that all of that is happening in the pilot's mind at all times, and that transfers to life as well. Yeah. So there is that process.
For better or worse.
Yeah. Well, but that's why, the world is so diverse, right? And it's helpful to get that thinking, that thought process. So I think for me, that was important to understand as fundamental aspects of safety, or even touching on design, and of course I'm not a fighter pilot, I don't fly jets. So there is a lot of knowledge gap, but at least I can understand what the flow might be in any one of those phases. And by understanding that, then we could start to think about, safety aspects. So what do you need, or can we load you with more information, or can we ask you for more things? So, for example, when doing studies with pilots, which I also did in the cockpit, is that so NASA has this workload list, also workload questionnaire, that you ask a few questions and you figure out, how busy the pilot is. But the problem with that is that I'm sitting with you, and, you are flying or doing something, or you're talking to me, and suddenly I throw at you 4 questions. Where's your thought process? You have to then regroup, come back with situational awareness, do all the scans, because your mental capacity got taken away. So this is not useful. It is useful for whoever's studying workload, but it's not representative of what happens in the cockpit, at all. Mm-hmm. And so I was interested, is that how can I get into that space and to understand what is the thought process, in order to then to put my 5 cents, that I might be helpful in some way.
That's incredible. That was always, one of the hardest things for me as a pilot was just that. We often ride that edge of cognitive limitation when we're in fighters, especially in air-to-air engagements where we're targeting into a lot of groups, and we have to organize that information, potentially communicate that to some of our other wingmen. It's very, very challenging. One of the things we do with technology is we compress the battle space into a representative imagery, such as a situational awareness page that brings all the data into one spot. One of the concerns that has been expressed by myself and others is that filtration process represents a point where potentially, if we're not looking for something, we're going to filter that out of the data set, because we're looking for something that has characteristics X and Y, but things such as balloons that might be traveling very slowly over the continental United States don't necessarily get picked up by those types of sensors.
That's a very good point, that you brought up about if you're not looking for it, you're not going to see it. And that's, so there's a famous experiments about the gorilla, right, working across the room, right? So that's the point, is that if you're focusing on something, other information is going to miss out. Pilots are the exception to that, though, because especially I would imagine in combat situation, or, when you're busy, aerobatic maneuvers is another one, or flying information. And so you are then, you're looking for minute change, but also what you're doing is that you're looking for when is the right time to communicate to your, whoever you need to communicate with, either your, wing person or air traffic control, or I don't know, to where you are, to keep situational awareness. And I find that, so when I was working, we were talking about conversion from C-130 analog aircraft, which is kind of got dials, so like clocks. Mm-hmm. So this is an old type of setup. It's a military big cargo airplane. Pilots say only the mother can love the face of the aircraft. It's a beautiful bird, actually. And when you hear it flying, it's very nice. So I do hear it. It does fly around where we live, and I come out and I like it. So then when so when we were converting from analog to glass, which has became screens, basically computer screens.
Inside the cockpit.
Inside the cockpit, yeah. So it's converting from analog cockpit going to a modern cockpit, which is called glass cockpit because it's full of displays, and so they're all reflective. And what I found is that when pilots were, doing tasks, and so it was in Australia at the time, so we were, again, as a team consulting, is it okay to go from 4 to 5 people, crew, to 2? And is it turned out to be, it's not, So, the claim was by Lockheed Martin that the 2 people, everything else automation would do for you. But no, what happens is what we just discussed with you about this communication aspect is that the navigator and the engineer and the master, who is kind of not part of the cockpit, right? But he's still the crew. They know when you've got the space, the capacity, whoever they need to communicate with, whether it's pilot with an engineer or a pilot with a load master or a navigator with a pilot, all of that is tightly, it's like a network, and they know when the window opens and you can communicate that information and it wouldn't overload somebody. But
when the system's working well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But that's what crew resource management is, right? Is when you learn to coordinate that. And I think that's important, is that looking for those gaps, when you're working at the edge of cognitive capacity, because I don't think it's edge of your cognitive ability, because that stretches all the time as you train. But I think it's important to recognize that you're always open to new input. And I think I heard you speak once when you were talking about merging, and you got split seconds when you're actually passing by another aircraft, and you could see how the wind, how the wind, not the wind, the air moves on their wings. That detail, and it's that split second, of knowing what the intention of that pilot is just by a slight change, of something. And you can't possibly articulate that. And this is what is precognitive or pre-verbal knowledge, it's called. So experts have that. And it's really hard to articulate.
Let's talk a little bit about that.
Okay.
I know that's an area of interest. So consciousness is an interesting topic area, of course. My loose understanding is that it takes about half a second, 500 milliseconds, for basically the chemical processes, the synapses from the essentially input of information to the brain through the analysis of that information, the conscious processing of that, and then the ability to then react to that information takes about a half a second. Of course, we react in much faster times than that. So that's kind of where those two models of how our brain work collide. And we don't necessarily have a good answer for that right now, is my understanding. Is that what you're talking about when you talk about the ability to somewhat have that intuition about what's happening? Is that one way of thinking about it, being able to react very quickly in high stress environments?
So there are sort of science that science doesn't accept, right? And I'm talking about actually, experiments that have been repeated over and over again about the ability to perceive, milliseconds before. So somehow we know of what's going to happen. So, and these experiments were done by Noetic Science Institute, IONS, and Dean Radin writes about this extensively, and they were repeated over and over hundreds and hundreds of times. So somewhere our body knows about what will happen, and the experiment really is set up to run by showing the pictures to you that are of, that will have an emotional response. So they're very either pleasant or very unpleasant. And somehow, without having any ability, you don't have to be special, just any human will have a reaction that we are not aware of, in a way, consciously, we're not aware of. So when science talks about, other aspects that we have this much time to react, I lived through my career as a scientist, for people thinking, having models of how our memory works, and it goes through like a diagram. Well, in my experience in talking to people working in extreme environments, there's no diagram. Like it just pops up, and sometimes you can't trace it where it's from. And this is from really, talking with pilots, with astronauts, with surgeons. They just know. They don't know why. They don't know how. They can tell you the background story if it's, for a medical committee review. They can make it up of why they thought to do that. Mm-hmm. But in reality, no. They just know. And it comes from this experience that people have, of working on this edge. This is why expert is different. So when you're talking,
can we think of the? Sorry, I just couldn't wait to say it. Can we think of this almost like the expert gets access to two things: one, more data over time to build their expertise, and then unique or new data because they're working on the edge and they're exposed to more difficult cases or harder cases. And would that be similar to a machine learning algorithm that is exposed to more data and newer data, and so its models are better? And we as the outside observer may not 100% understand why that machine learning model is performing the way it is or outputting the exact answer. We can't see into exactly how the model works or the way it's work exactly. Is that almost the same for an expert? It's just the conscious experience of that model being generated is outside of their experience?
I'm thinking on how I don't know how to answer that.
It sounds similar, it's almost like an expert is doing this more often. He can't actually say why. Perhaps it's hard to train someone else to say, hey, here's the exact skill set I have, because they haven't fully processed it into perhaps a list, but they're still reacting to their data and their experience. Mm-hmm. And is it coming from nowhere, or is it perhaps just unrecognizable because it's coming from inference of a lot of data?
Well, I'll give you an example. I think I quite like, real kind of tangible things that you can work through. So the method that I've used for understanding, the thought processes and this preverbal expertise, that now in 3 professions that I have looked at. So what happens is that firefighters, so this is where the technique that I'm using has got originated in Australia. So they were studying to understand of why, some firefighters are able to exit the building just before it's going to collapse, right? Or how do they determine, where, bushfire is going to spread? It's not obvious, but they know. Mm-hmm. And so when you listen to them, you get goosebumps, for these experts talking about it, because they talk about this as a living system, the fire, on how it behaves. And so when they're discussing it, they're saying like, it crackles differently, it behaves in a certain way, it has heat differently, it flows differently. But then when they were trying to teach other novice, because the whole point is that how can you pass that knowledge? And so they're not allowed, right, they've got this protection, heat protection covers on their helmet. They actually open them. And I don't recall if they remember or don't remember doing that, and whether when they come out they pull it down. But what happened is that they feel the change, either in movement of air or in temperature. And that's when they know they need to get out. Oh. And it's so crucial. And you could never, possibly someone who is so aware of their senses and how they operate. But to get to that granularity of expertise, which is literally preverbal, and it wouldn't have come out unless that technique was used, when you can actually take them back into that situation to that degree that they can recall what was happening. But they were doing this, and this piece of information, possibly saved many, many lives, including getting out of the building too early and saving somebody's life, but also, for the crew to get out on time.
That's interesting. We call that as pilots flying by the seat of our pants. Yes. So I'm sure you're aware. And of course, why we don't like flying in the simulator very much, because it just can't mimic, what it is actually like to be in the jet.
Yeah, exactly. And so
So I am interested in this, where does this information come from? And, how do you know that, a good example for every day, for us driving is sort of like, what the driver is going to do. In essence, they haven't done anything yet, but you could see that for sure they're just going to cross you in a minute, or they're not going to indicate and turn, or something, or they're going to stop suddenly. There is this expectation, and you're processing all of that information, and possibly it was there, like you might have by glimpse saw that there was something coming to the road, and that's why they would react. But in actuality, you can't articulate that, but you react to that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I'm interested in, is that ability to absorb all of that information and be safe. And so I'm interested where that safety, decision comes from. What pieces of information do you collect? And that's exactly what, these pilots articulated to me in order to design a different type of layout of information so they could be more efficient and quicker. But it's not coming from me. It's understanding the cognitive process of the expert and then giving them to articulate them. Because if you ask a pilot, how did your landing go? What would you say? You land on the deck.
I honestly don't even know.
Yeah, exactly.
I would fly it in, and I would just probably describe my deviations from what would be expected as far as my airspeed or my altitudes or glide slope, and say, it was a little high that time, but otherwise it was pretty good.
Yeah, exactly. So how could I improve displays from that? Like I can't. It seems like it's already perfect, right? There's nothing I can do. So, me as maybe somebody else can, but the point is that that you report what you generally trained to do, and it's safe to do, and it's cultural to do, and it's efficient, right? Because that's all that's required. There was nothing out of the ordinary. But in order for me to help in any way, I would want to see of what was actually flowing through your mind. Was it a night landing and you saw, bioluminescence and you looked at that, for example?
Or was my eye actually going?
Yeah. So I'm interested in that. But there is also interesting to that where you're talking about the eyes. So there is, so suddenly the technology kind of, as develops, and there were eye tracking, to see where pilots are looking. And suddenly this became like a big thing. But it's not the fact that you're absorbing that information.
You're looking, you're not maybe seeing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Also not seeing, but also it might not be useful. You looked at it but ignored it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's taken as data as if you've taken it in. Or you look at that, but maybe, it has nothing to do. So nothing to do with you needing that information. Mm-hmm. So it's about taking that of what was, like literally reading your thought process second by second and understanding on what that part of it, help you to stay safe. Mm. And that's what I'm interested in. And that's the most helpful way to kind of then to externalize or help you out externally on the displays, place information differently, so you can next time you don't need to search for it in your memory or do a mental calculation, hence cognitive engineering, right? So the subject is to help your cognition to be assisted by technology that can do other things better for you.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, I want to ask you how perhaps that type of cognitive engineering and your lessons learned could perhaps be applied to better understanding and building procedures around UAP. But first, perhaps you could just provide a little background about any interest that you have or any professional experience, personal experience that you might have with UAP, or how you got into this as a area of aviation safety concern.
So it's a taboo. The topic is a taboo. And it's taboo in science in the same way as it is in aviation. So I don't work on that, at the university in my current position. So this is kind of a hobby. Mm-hmm. And it's sad because, I grew up with the notion that people experience this. I had no problem kind of putting that into my mind, or some people see it, and that's possibly in the field of their view based on what they do or where they work. just unusual things happen. But then, since, several years now, at least 2 years, that it's kind of came to a surface in the US, and it became a real issue. I thought, so what do I know? How can I use my tools that I have sort of acquired over the years to assist? Because I'm passionate about, aviation, my profession. I'm interested how to improve people in extreme environments, what they can do. So this is, just ticks all the boxes for me. So I'm very curious, but there's no funding, there's just nothing. And you're not even allowed to mention this in the community, which is really sad because it's a real issue.
Have you spoken with any of your colleagues about this?
No. I spoke with pilots that I used to work with. So the pilots are very, the people that I know, openly share or say they have or they haven't, and what was it, but generally people would stay off that topic if it becomes on record, right? We have tools that, may assist the issue. So I don't understand, why can't we look at that,
Who's we, the scientific community?
Well, I mean, I can see tools, right, that I have used in the teams that I've worked with, right? So why not utilize those tools? And obviously it's not one person's job, so I can't do this alone. There has to be a team. I can't tackle this on my own. I can't tackle this without pilots, coming forward and being, wanting to share of what is actually going through their mind, feeling safe, And, like with pilots I worked with, I talk about this, kind of great detail in my work, but you don't have to mention names. The whole point is that I navigate, that I understand from my point of view, it's an information processing challenge, right, in the first issue. So, and what happens, for example, so how it relates to what I've done before, right? So my expertise were in dealing how automation is a challenge, in a way. So there was a problem called automation surprise, in a way.
In aviation?
In aviation, yeah. So when we went from analog to glass, so from, clock-like cockpits, with
the modern digital displays.
Yes, that's right. So then there was an idea of an autopilot, built into it. And it's not just autopilot, there's many, many functions. So it can navigate, it descend, it can ascend, it can navigate, calculate the fuel, estimate. There's many, many things. And the challenge is that it was programmed by engineers, or how to make efficient, fuel management, to save, because of how they manage flight path and how they manage ascent, descent, acceleration, deceleration, change in modes. So it was all about, this hoo-ha about saving, also saving environment, because it will save fuel. But what happened is that when it came through and pilots did get trained on it properly, it's called ab initio kind of conversion, where you go from a previous cockpit to an automated cockpit, and it's all done in a simulator. It's actually computer-based training, which I went through to understand, how it filtrates. So I went through A320 and 777 and C-130J, to understand what was the process, but I never flew one. But what helped me is to understand on what, when they start speaking the language of what they were experiencing as a problem. So what I saw is that accidents were happening more so than, they slightly increased. So there were like 30 accidents per year. This is like late 90s. And then there was airplane crashing, so fatal. So this is fatal accidents.
This is an increase. So
increase.
When they introduced automation.
Exactly. Increase by every 1 week.
An accident a week.
Yeah, an accident a week. So there were nearly 50 accidents per year. So And so it became a real problem, right? And so the analysis, initially they were saying there were like, very high human error. And then they started to introduce other experts into the investigation. And what started to happen is that people were not unable, they couldn't understand of why this was happening. And people were not happy to talk about it because they did not know what the aircraft was doing. So when I would go to conferences, right, and say, look, the pilot doesn't know what the cockpit is, what the aircraft is doing. People were like, what? I'm flying this aircraft.
Last thing you want to hear.
Yeah, I'm flying this, commercial airline, as let's say, every week some business people fly it very frequently. But it was a problem. And, they were all trained, they were all checked. They were checked, check captains who would do the training who had the same problem. And there were certain things that were assumed that the pilot doesn't need to know, or assumed that the pilot would think the same way. But the problem is that the aircraft managed flight path or any type of change in mode on how it would, for example, transition from descent to ascent or to altitude. The logic was different on how they would fly, what they will put priority to, instead of fuel management.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
the
that's,
engineers programmed it to be as efficient as possible instead of so that it could be flown by the pilot as safely and easily as possible.
Yeah. And so the challenge is that they were saying, I don't know, what's it doing? How did it switch? And so the accidents were thought to be 80%, human error, meaning not human error, pilot error. But then they started to look in further and trying to understand, to depict it. And it was 40%, human error, not pilot error, but human error. So there were many things there was still human error, but not the person in the cockpit. So, for example, there would be, maintenance error, that contribute to it, management problems, pressures that the pilots had. And all of these things have to line up for an accident to happen. So it's like a Swiss cheese model by James Reason that I'm sure you taught in your...
I was.
in human factors. So, and the idea is that all of these things detract from pilots' attention.
Everyone adds a little bit into that problem, essentially.
Exactly, yeah. So, for example, a report that needs to be filed that they haven't filed. Management, said you must save fuel. Do not do an extra circuit. For example, if you're unsure or the weather is not right, or just press on. Do land or land on time. This is it.
Burn more fuel and leave yourself in a tighter position, perhaps, be more economical.
Yeah, yeah. So, and all of those things, they're playing on the pilot's mind instead of focusing on descent and safe landing. So all of these things, and of course there's, family, personal, colleagues, all of that is happening. And then cockpit does something. It's like, what? I'm just about to land and I didn't set, that mode or didn't transition into that. And suddenly the aircraft is either stalling or descending too fast, or you're losing altitude. And suddenly terrain comes up and thinking like, we shouldn't be here anyway. Yeah. And you are miles behind then. The aircraft.
You're behind there.
Yeah, you're behind the aircraft, and you need to now not only deal with the situation, but you need to figure out where you are, navigationally, operationally, and whom do you talk to, what do you do, and of course you pull up first, right? But all of this is still going through. And what if you don't have enough lift? And so you're not flying by the seat of your pants because you are trusting. So this trust in automation somehow, we trust easily actually as humans. We trust very easily, but we give our trust easily. And what has been happening is that pilots started to talk among themselves because they could not say they don't understand what their cockpit, what is happening in the aircraft. Or check captain couldn't say, I did not know what was happening, got cut out.
Yeah.
But then in pubs...
They're all having the same issues.
They're all having the same issues, but they're not talking.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. So because they're surprised, they're shocked. So it's their reputation, right? It's their professional stand, on who they are. they don't know what they're flying, they've just converted. They might have got an increase in salary. All sorts of consequences. It's livelihood. This is what the person, the whole life had been reaching, and they're finally flying the most latest, aircraft, and they can't, they're not doing their job, which they used to do.
They're
20
blaming
years
themselves
before.
and not the system itself.
Yeah, but because when you are flying, you are responsible, right? So you are responsible for the airplane, you're responsible for your crew if you're a captain, and you're responsible for everybody who's in the back, right? So you're thinking, you're processing all of that. So all of that is going through your mind, in addition that I don't know what the aircraft is doing. So I'm thinking, do I say it? Do I not? Do I just, work through it and hopefully it will never happen again? Like different thinking.
I imagine that thinking that you just said, maybe I can ignore it, it'll never happen again. I imagine that probably goes through a lot of pilots' minds if they have a UAP experience.
Possibly, but it's once it entered your mind, you can't wipe it off. Not really, So if it happened to you and you're thinking, well, I'm just going to ignore it, right? But it's there. It happened. So it will now take up some of your working memory. So your capacity to absorb new things or to act or to be safe or to remember other important things. So, and this is safety. This is a problem because once a little bit capacity of you thinking about safety has taken away, so it's kind of chopping your resources, and suddenly you're not on the task. So same thing was happening. So they started talking in the pubs, or starting to talk to friends, who would, they will test the waters.
Trusted friends.
Yeah, test the waters, and then suddenly they realize they're not alone. And it's a big relief. It's a big relief because they're now saying, like, it's not me, I'm not stupid. I have, all my professional training is correct. I'm experiencing this. It's not my own fault. It's not because I'm not attentive or did not train well. Everybody, not everybody, but the majority of the people in my profession are having this. I haven't talked to everyone, but people I touch base and trust, they're having the same issue. So they're starting now to think about what to do. So at this time, the aviation, so aircraft designers are not knowing this, right? They don't know that.
We're still talking about automation. I know it sounds like we could be talking about UAP right now, but we're still talking about automation. It's very closely aligned.
Yeah, exactly. So the aircraft designers still don't know that there is an automation surprise problem with pilots, right? But they're not starting to talk, and they feel like it is becoming a safety. So people who are safety conscious, like yourself, people who need to keep, safety policies, procedures, and constantly debriefing and seeing what the problem might be, they're starting to rise, but they're punished. They're punished until they're backed up. So some pilots lose jobs, they lose families, their children suffer. So like big consequences, and some people never recover. Some people commit suicide. It's that bad.
Wow.
So like these are real, lives. And, and the only reason that person committed suicide, right, it's because he couldn't take responsibility of killing all other people in that aircraft. That is something that is going through their mind. And I think that's important to account, right? So these are people who are honorable people, and we disrespect their professional opinion. This is shameful, I think. You wouldn't, you would trust the surgeon, right? With your life. And here you trust, hundreds of people in the back of the aircraft, and we're not trusting, their actual observation, that they feel uncomfortable flying or they don't feel they're gonna, bring those people across safely. So I think it's important,
Yeah.
Even if it's just, it maybe, sounds like a cry for help, So maybe it's real, maybe if it's real for this person who's been doing this job for many, many years, maybe we should pay attention. And if there are many people talking about it, then definitely, there's a professional concern. And these are people who are, trusted with many, many things.
So how did that eventually get resolved in the automation world? You said, they got more support. What did that look like?
So pilots got together, and so at the time the internet wasn't that advanced. So it's 20 years ago, or more than 20 years ago now. So 25. So they started to create forums. So these are forums that you wouldn't be admitted to unless you are.
I might belong to a few.
Yeah. So unless you're checked and trusted, right? Mm-hmm. So they would start discussing these issues, and they will start actually putting technical details in. So they will say, this mode, that mode, I was doing that, and this happened. And then the other pilots say, I had exactly the same thing, or no, something else different happened for me. Watch out for that.
So the only way they felt comfortable was basically back channeling it on web forums to have conversations.
Yeah.
Anonymously, I assume.
Yeah. Well, I don't know.
Semi-anonymous.
Yeah.
Who knows? But yeah.
I don't remember whether there were. I mean, certainly you could log in under a different name, sure. Because I got into those forums by pilots whom I worked with. They said, go check this out, and you'd read one-liners, thousands and thousands, of reporting the types of automation, and they're not grouped by anything. So there would be like, I flew yesterday, and on landing, my speed declined to nearly to a stall, and these were the steps, and this is how I recovered.
Wow. So actually putting actual procedures in.
Yeah. So because they're concerned for each other.
Well, I get it. I totally get it as a pilot, but it's just it's shocking and sad to see that that's the state of affairs at that point.
Yeah. So then, they feel power in numbers, right? Yeah. And somehow I don't know that step, but it filtrates to probably it filtrated through accidents, unfortunately. So major.
That's typically how we learn aviation through blood.
So I'm just terrible, right? Mm-hmm. So because this is hundreds of people and children, and anyway, it's loss of life in, and so these started to rise, and there were some famous accidents, that to do with colliding with a mountain and unable to recover, and then they go to black box, and this is because it was not spoken to, but people were experiencing this way before, right? So. These accidents, and I'm scanning these. So my PhD is to do with improving, converting from analog to glass and making sure that we can improve information processing, to help the pilot to be more efficient. Mm-hmm. Because the expectation that automation will take hold or replace.
Just fix everything.
Will replace engineer or navigator. Mm. And so now pilot can look at it. But the pilot is not told the information. He needs to look it up. Hence, his capacity is taken away.
He can't monitor this.
Yes, he can't do other things. So there's many assumptions that are done. And it was interesting, to look into that. So now what we're seeing is that I suddenly have access to all this database, mm-hmm. right? A precious database that by concerned pilots. In the forums. Yeah, that's right. So now, we as scientists are so pouring all over this, because then we're looking what happens with accidents. We're waiting for accident reports to come out. They take months to come out. Obviously there's a very lot of diligent people mm-hmm. who look into it. Concerned pilots, look into it, and so the awareness is being raised. And I now present this information on conferences of what I observe, the analysis that I see, and the word filtrates, back to aviation. I meet Airbus captain who was designing philosophy for Airbus, and everybody's concerned. Like many things are starting to change, and new upgrades are happening mm-hmm. to the cockpit. But more so, first thing is training. Yeah. First thing, procedures and training. This is something that you can fix quicker, right? And hopefully not through loss of life.
What lessons can we take from that and apply to UAP?
Yeah. I think we have no time.
No time. Because if it took, look, 25 years ago, and only now
new pilots feel comfortable talking about them not understanding something in the cockpit. So that generation who were punished had to leave the profession to remove the stigma of reporting, because that pain was still there. People heard it in the corridors. Don't you dare. You might lose
So
it.
there was a lag between when a suitable reporting mechanism was put in place and when it truly became integrated into the pilot community.
Yeah. So the safety culture, you speak up because, so for example, so it took 25 years. It's as long as professionals stay in the profession to leave, and then for the new generation to take over. So do we have 25 years from now, when stigma is still here, to report? And for these people who are flying, this basically, even if they don't collide, if people say like, why should we be concerned about it? That there's no interaction, for example. Well, it's in their mind, it's playing, and it's taking away their working memory. It's taking away their situational awareness. It's taking away out of flying safe. It's taking away from, doing their job diligently. It's playing on their mind. Are they crazy? Are they not? And it's a big issue, for a pilot to think, am I hallucinating? Am I safe? Am I a good pilot? Am I still fit to work? These things still go through the mind. Why should we put people through that?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you saw it. Okay, well, let's look at it. What is it? What did you see? Describe. Let's see, maybe there is a forum, where other people experiencing the same thing. But so I think this is the first lesson, so that even people are not talking about it, how does it detract from their professional life and from their attention of being safe in the cockpit? Carrying all these people, are they, have they experienced it and they got, frightened even, for example? They don't want this because of their belief system, maybe even.
Mm-hmm.
They just don't want it to look at it. It's just, it doesn't fit into their, world of view. And that's acceptable too, because we're all different. We all experience the world through a different lens. So why not, why not accept and see what we can do with this? It's a real human concern. It's care. It's professional care.
Mm-hmm. And if I think there's an actual effort to provide context around what these pilots could be seeing, it's going to minimize the distraction and enable them to, hopefully in the future, with process or procedure that could be implemented, be able to, ensure safe separation from that object, and then be able to properly communicate that to the appropriate authorities, whether that's ATC that would then handle that or not. I've spoken with pilots who have been hesitant to even radio out to ATC, air traffic control, because they don't want their call sign associated with a sighting even.
Yeah.
And that they have then reached out after they've landed to other pilots they heard to then let them know that they've shared the same thing. I think we're moving in the right direction, but it's still something that I hear from pilots that they are uncomfortable talking about it publicly and essentially want to keep their heads down and out of it for the time being anyways.
Yeah, and why? What's playing on their mind? Why do they not want to do it? It means they're concerned. They don't want to be affected, and that means it does take capacity. It worries them to some extent, and I'm interested in that. To what degree does it affect their performance?
So how do you propose on studying that?
So I think first, a very good step to do is just to get to speak with the pilots who are experiencing, to understand what are they thinking, what is their concern about it, not even just what they're seeing, right? Because seeing is one thing, but then what happens with your cognition, how loaded are you with this concern or thought, or maybe not even a problem? Maybe they're curious, It doesn't matter. But the point is that to collect that reaction, so when the other person is confronted with it, they know, or they have read, for example, that other people experience similar concerns or discomfort or excitement or fear or concerned what other people would think about it. Should I talk to air traffic control? What would my co-pilot think? And, all of these things, do I talk about this to the family? All of that thing, because it's your professional time. It takes on hold. It's kind of slows you down. It's a weight that shouldn't be. We shouldn't be burdening that person with that. They should be able to do their job, what they're expected to do, and given the parameters, if something is unexpected, well, there is a backup, right? Like in mission control, right? There is lots of scientists, there are safety experts, there are people who can take that load off and say, okay, what are you getting? Let's have a look at this. How does this affect you? So first, I think from my point of view, I would people who experience this, soon after the event, to speak.
Well, let's be clear before we go into that you have you're proposing an actual study.
Yeah.
Right. And so this would be something that you would oversee, and you would be looking for volunteers to participate in.
Yeah.
It would involve some type of reporting, whether anonymous or not. So just to be clear, this is something that you are looking to actually engage on as soon as practical. So yeah, I just wanted to put that out there. So, we're not just talking about hypotheticals now.
Yeah. So I thought on how could what I know or what I have done might be helpful in this situation. So by understanding that, so first step would be to get people to talk about not that what they're seeing, but what they're experiencing. Because it's the experience that allows us to open up or trust others. But if I tell you, I've experienced this, you will tell me, oh yeah, I did too. Mm-hmm. But you may not step up to it until I told you. And that trust is important. So, and then that person feels accepted, they could literally exhale, and you see people kind of like, like weight is falling off the shoulders because somebody got it, somebody understood, and I'm not alone. And we can now, even if you don't look at it together, but at least, I'm not going mad, and it's not an illusion, and it's really happening and to other people similar to me. So by understanding what they're experiencing, by going into a situation, maybe even, things that are happening before and how this enters their mind, how it's then impacts on what they're doing, and by understanding what kind of thought processes go on, I'm sure there will be similarities across people, and there will be people. Then, once we understand these categories of what person is thinking through, just by recollection of how did it affect me, then we are able to then look up also to understand in what scenario it happened. So capture under what circumstances it happened. So now we have these categories of what person experienced and what scenarios were around that. So we then can put this into a cockpit, simulator, and get pilots who have not experienced this to see, obviously they would know, so it wouldn't be complete surprise, but they would know that they would be experiencing it, but they don't know when or how and how they would actually react. And the interesting thing, they would have thought through on how I would react. But what fascinates me every time, we surprise ourselves in the situations of unexpected events. And most often in a good way, like we rise to the event and able to deal with it. So then at that point, I can use the methodology that I used with surgeons, with pilots, with astronauts, that was used with firefighters, to actually depict the finite, those microseconds that you're talking about, of decision making and thought processing, and how does this piece of information actually affect our cognition? And then we are able to draw even further, distinction on what is helpful, because we will see the reaction, what is not helpful, what corrective actions can be taken that are helpful, and we then can write procedures, we can design training. From that on, we're able to take some outcome that would be helpful. Because once, why do you do simulator training?
Build the muscle memory.
Exactly, yeah. So it takes away capacity, as well.
Yep.
So apart from, knowing what to do with the aircraft, but it's also, you don't need to process it as much. It goes into kind of a secondary buffer and you can take new information. So once, even if I read how other pilots react when I am in the aircraft, I would have already in my mind thought through those reactions and possibly even categorize myself where I would be. So when I encounter it, it wouldn't be as much of a surprise because I've already thought of it. And it would be even better if what the suggestions are, how other pilots dealt with it after, what they do during and after. So now, once we have this process in our mind, we then don't need to occupy our,
loaded
precious
memory, essentially. Yeah.
So you have suddenly a capacity to deal with all the safety things that you need to do. And then we could do training. There would be something we can do, like even computer training, something, online that's as easy. Maybe for, more serious type of operations, there could be a different type of training, and we could look into that, depending on, how much of a safety concern it becomes. Because through understanding scenarios and reactions, we understand how serious the implication could be. And hence we can mitigate, because it's all about prevention.
Well, a lot of pilots been reaching out to me both to support whether something I'm doing with Americans for Safe Aerospace or perhaps go out merged. I can, help to continue to bring in pilots, identify them perhaps, and would be happy to funnel them to your study, if with their permission, of course, if that's something that gets off the ground. But if there's anyone that potentially would be interested in funding that type of work or is aware of any grants that might be appropriate for you, we'll put your contact information at the bottom.
Yes, please. Yeah, I very much want to do this, in a professional manner, to actually give a dedicated time. So, and, for that, it would be good to have not just me for one, but it's actually have a group of experts, that want to work the problem, and it could be funded to a degree that we can actually dedicate time and produce a result that is useful. And so there are like 4 phases to this study. So it would be good to, not to do it as a hobby of often when I can, or often when other people that sort of I work with can, because that delays by months and months, because something takes over, or a family, like we're all, leaving on this earth kind of within time frame. So in order not to postpone it, to do it, I would love to get it properly funded. So if people can come forward with funding, or somebody who is willing to provide input financially and also experts, then I think that's a good step, to provide some training or procedures or even awareness, in the basic level, and I feel it's easy. It can be done. We don't need much to take it forward.
Good.
Even without going to a simulator, which would be like a more expensive component, right?
Yeah.
But even before that, to prepare for the sim to get the scenarios. But even that, I think it's not that challenging to do. People would come forward and we probably can find a simulator. So all of these organizational things that, whoever is willing to contribute to a degree, that would be amazing. As part of, this volunteering effort of looking into how the UAP events are reported currently, I looked at the multitude, actually, that there are many ways to report the UAP, which is great. This is a big breakthrough. But when I looked at it, it's, sometimes several dozens of questions, if not hundreds, because people are looking for data and they want to split it to analyze it. And
pilots aren't going to fill out 100 question answer form at the end of the
exactly.
day.
Yeah, I worked with pilots long enough, to say that it's just going to, even if you've got a will for safety, it will just get beaten out of you, and you just would not complete. So it's either have to be motivational, and they know. So it's sort of like you setting up yourself for a task at hand, and you figure out how much time it will take you. But if you don't see the end of it, you lose the will to do it. So it's about making an effort, or bringing people together to concerted effort to figure out how best to do it.
It's more than just a checklist. Then.
It's not, yeah. So, and I think it's about getting some people who are already working the problem together as a workshop setting, and to make sure that we all contribute on how best to bring the data that is required, and also make it palatable for processing. Like those forums that were just one-liners. It was difficult for the researcher, but I was curious. But to make it, now that we've got lessons learned, and there are techniques on how you can encourage people to continue doing the questionnaire, but also to make it so they could see where it ends, and also see why are they doing it, so they can see and feel that they're not just feeling data that's not going to be used or going to go into the ether.
I've seen pilots. I've seen some of the reports that they've done, at least in the Navy, since 2018 or so. Some of them have been released via FOIA. One, I will say, optimistic point is that many of the pilots added their own text at the bottom, the other box there, and a lot of them were asking for more feedback and were seemingly very interested in being further engaged in this topic. So I think, to your point, if we can, properly engage pilots with this, I think we're going to see more data come out, which is only going to help this issue.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, thanks. That's amazing. That's good, That's people are coming forward. I think it's time.
Very good.
Yeah.
I'm excited. I think it's time as well. Dr. Iya Whiteley, thank you for making the trip here to New Hampshire, to the United States, to have this conversation. It's a pleasure to meet you in person. I'm extremely excited about the expertise that you're bringing to this field, and that the potential study that you could engage with to help bring about better procedure and reporting and psychological safety for military and commercial pilots. So thank you.
Thank you, Ryan, for inviting me here, and possibility of sharing of what I can contribute. And very much, I think it's a team effort. So, you speaking for many years now about this topic, and, the opportunity to get other people on board to solve this would be amazing. So, a pleasure. Thank you for making it happen.
Thank you.